Okay, and welcome to this interview. I am delighted to welcome Louise Digby. Hello, Louise, how are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me today.
Great. Well, we're going to have a great conversation about chaotic foods, but do you just want to start by just giving us just a very brief introduction to who you are? I know you're a nutritionist, but tell us a little bit more.
Sure, yeah. So I'm a registered nutritional therapist and I specialize in women's health and specifically weight loss for women over the age of 35, 40. And I specialize in that area because it's an area where weight can become particularly tricky and also where health can start to feel like it deteriorates for no real rhyme or reason. And many of the women that come to me have been trying really hard to eat well and stay active and stay healthy, but just not really seeing their health improve or just seeing things gradually go backwards. So, my approach is about taking a holistic approach and looking at them as a whole person and what their individual needs are so that we can optimize their health and go a bit deeper than just, diets and portion control, and instead make sure that their hormones are balanced and their blood sugars are balanced and their guts are healthy and all that sort of thing.
Wonderful. So yes, that's exactly where I'm coming from, and we've got different skill sets. So it's great to have you on here on the podcast because I've got an extra view here. So yeah. So today I wanted to talk about chaotic foods. So I have made this phrase up, but what I think they are foods that have negative, unexpected effects on the body, such as, for example, what I found was that sugar gave me such immense hormonal imbalances and mood swings that it made my life unlivable, really. And so for me, sugar is a chaotic food. So when you think of this phrase, chaotic foods, are there any other foodstuffs that come to mind for you?
Yeah, sugar is definitely a big one. Um, Diet foods, I think, are one that come to mind, and also ultra processed foods. So diet foods, I think, is an interesting one because when we're talking about diet foods, we're generally talking about foods that have had the sugar removed and been replaced with sweeteners, or
Yeah.
had the fat removed and maybe been replaced with sugars in some cases. So even though sugar is a chaotic food, the foods that don't have sugar or have had the sugar removed can also be in that category as well. And my concern with diet foods is that they're not very satiating. Foods that have had the fat removed, they don't fill you up. They tend to be loaded with sugar and they tend to make you hungrier and disrupt your blood sugars and can be quite inflammatory. And so that can drive cravings and hunger and fatigue and all these things that aren't very helpful when you're trying to eat well and manage your weight. Um, and then diet foods that have had the sugars removed and been replaced with sweeteners, that is um, not helpful either, because the sweeteners can drive hunger and disrupt gut bacteria and all sorts of things. So I think the diet foods are not helpful, which is really ironic because they're supposed to help you lose weight, but actually they tend to have the opposite effect. And then I think the other big one, as I said, is ultra processed foods. And in terms of what that is, ultra processed foods are foods that have ultra processed ingredients in. So these are essentially ingredients that have been pretty much made in a lab. And they kind of started off as foods originally and have been so highly processed that there is no real nutritional value left to them. They're basically just a bleached, bland
Mm.
ingredient, which is added to the food product to just give it a better consistency or to bulk it out or that sort of thing. The problem with that is that these ultra processed foods have been shown to really drive appetite. They're very addictive, they're very moreish, partly because they just don't really have any flavor, they don't give us anything. So your body isn't getting what it needs, it's not getting any nutrients, it's not getting anything to kind of satisfy its need for food and nutrition. So your body just wants to keep eating more and more of it. And many of these ultra processed foods are kind of also in that magical combination of pretty much 50% fat or carbs, sorry, 50% fat or 50% sugar and carbs. And that combination of fat and carbs is very addictive. So, the ultra processed foods, it's very difficult to regulate how much you're eating when they're a substantial part of your diet.
Yes, I was reading the other day, and this blew me away, that the only time in nature where you have fat and carbs mixed together is breast milk. So who needs to really put on a lot of fat, a newborn baby, and it's this incredibly comforting mix, and that just, you can see the chaos that wreaks on us who are no longer newborn babies. It's really quite concerning, isn't it?
Mm, and it's one of the reasons why they think, that may be such an addictive combination, the fat and the carbs, is because it does mimic breast milk. And, like you say, for a baby, you want the baby to have lots of breast milk and grow big and strong. But for an adult, having that combination of fat and carbs is dangerous.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So, I know that you, as you said, you specialize in stubborn weight loss. I think you might have touched on this. The question here is, how do chaotic foods affect weight? So you've talked about appetite.
Mm.
Is there any? I know, for example, like insulin it's a fat storage hormone, and carbs will raise insulin. So I'm just thinking of other ways that these chaotic foods will make people gain weight when they don't want to.
Mm. Well, all the foods that we've mentioned have the potential to drive inflammation. And inflammation is it's kind of driven by your immune system. And when inflammation becomes uncontrolled in the body, then it can be quite damaging. So inflammation is a normal thing. If you cut your finger or you
Yeah.
graze yourself, then it's normal to have a bit of inflammation, a bit of redness and swelling, where the blood flow has increased and your body is trying to heal. But when we have systemic inflammation, so all through the body, and it's uncontrolled, that's when it can be quite damaging. And that can be very disruptive to your hormones. It drives insulin resistance, disruptive to your gut bacteria, to your brain chemicals, and really deplete nutrients in your body as well. And all of those things will link back to your metabolism and how your body ultimately burns fat. Um, so there's the inflammation link, and then there's also the blood sugars is a real core part of how these foods can disrupt your weight management. So again, these chaotic foods, part of the reason why they're chaotic is because they can disrupt your blood sugars significantly. So they can cause spikes in your blood sugars. And when you have a spike in blood sugar, insulin increases. And as you said, insulin is a fat storage hormone. So it's going to put you into fat storage mode. But also, after a blood sugar high comes a blood sugar
Yes.
crash.
Oh, yes, I remember them very well. Yeah.
Yeah, so when your blood sugar crashes down low, your energy levels drop, your cravings increase, your willpower drops. So you're going to be more likely to give into food cravings. And you're also going to have more food cravings as well, particularly for sweet things and carby things. So that kind of links back to the appetite side of things,
Yes.
but also these ups and downs in your blood sugars, they drive stress in the body, they raise your stress hormones. And if our cortisol levels stay too elevated for too long, that can really drive storage of fat around your
Yes.
tummy.
Yes. Yes.
And it can also drive muscle loss, because we kind of strip our muscles for energy so that we can cope with this high stress load. Um, and that's not a good thing, because muscles are so important for your metabolism. A muscle is metabolically active. So if you're
Yes.
losing muscle, it's going to be reducing your metabolism, and you're going to be burning less energy, even when you're resting and sleeping. So the stress impact on your muscles is significant, and then the stress impact on your hormones is significant as
Yes.
well. So if your cortisol levels are raised, that can reduce your thyroid function and disrupt your sex hormones too. And again, those are very involved in your weight management. So it's very disruptive.
I specialize in type 2 diabetes, and the conversation that I'm hearing people have is that this is something's gone wrong in the body, it's a problem of insulin. And I thought, no, it's not. It's a problem of adaptation. It's that the poor old body is trying to pump out this insulin to deal with too much glucose from all these processed foods. And I thought the body is trying its best to adapt and under terrible circumstances. And I think it's the same with inflammation. I'm just interested what you think about this, that inflammation is, as you say, it's a natural, but very vital process. And we're fine about our thumbs swelling up, aren't we? If we bump it or something like this, because we know it's going to go down in a few days. But what people don't realize is they themselves are creating a lot of inflammation, and the poor old body is just trying to adapt to it.
Yeah, you're completely right. Inflammation is a like a repairing response. It's your body trying to adapt. And it's a similar story for your hormones, like insulin, like your sex hormones. You know, your hormones, or hormones generally, have been a bit of a scapegoat in terms of, you see online loads of things about how it's your hormones that are causing you to hold on to fat. And yes, the hormones are a big factor, but they're still a symptom, just like the inflammation is still a symptom. There's something causing the inflammation, there's something causing the hormone disruption, and we need to go a level deeper than that and actually address the root cause. And that could be imbalances in the gut, that could be um, high toxic load, it could be deficiencies. And again, a level deeper than that is what's causing those things. And
Yes.
that it comes back to stress, diet, lifestyle, sleep, and kind of those big pillars of health. All our hormones serve a purpose and we need them. Even insulin, even though we call it a fat storage hormone, it's incredibly essential. Um, all these hormones are there to do a job. It's just that when they're out of balance, which might mean that there's too much of them, it could mean that there's not enough of them, or it could mean that two hormones or more are out of balance with each other. So a good example of that are estrogen and progesterone. They need to be in balance to each
Oh,
other.
wow. Okay.
That's kind of how hormones are imbalanced, as opposed to, not having them at all, if that makes sense.
Or having like the idea of oh, you have too much of them once a month. It's
Yes.
ridiculous. So
Yeah.
yeah, I got a question here because about sugar. Coming back to sugar, is when I gave up, 95% of the sugar I ate, and I felt crazy on it. One of the main benefits was that my periods, for the first time in living memory, just started to run like clockwork, and my PMT, or if you're in the States, PMS, disappeared immediately. I felt, within 2 weeks, I felt like a different woman. And I've seen similar transformations in clients. This sort of, I have no more PMT. I can't believe it. So, but I've never truly understood, and maybe you can explain this in, you're good at explaining things in lay people's terms, but the effect that sugar has on a woman's menstrual cycle.
So it's kind of similar to what we've already been talking about, really, in terms of sugar. And I should say, when I'm talking about sugar, I mean too much sugar. It's, a little bit of sugar isn't going to
No.
cause many problems for a lot of people, but too much sugar consistently in the diet, it can drive inflammation. It can, as I say, it can drive up insulin levels, which also drives inflammation. And what we were just talking about with, the stress hormones being impacted, all of that has an impact on your sex hormones. And just kind of simplify it, when you're inflamed, um, you're more likely to have estrogen dominance. So estrogen dominance is where not necessarily that you've got too much estrogen. It could be that you've got too much, but it could be that you don't have enough progesterone in relation to estrogen. So estrogen is kind of like what we would call the diva hormone. It's what kind of gives you your attitude and your energy. And then the progesterone is a very calming hormone. So if you don't have enough progesterone, then estrogen is dominant and it can take over. And then
Wow.
that's when more PMS-like symptoms can occur, and also heavier bleeding, and just feeling a bit more erratic and bit kind of like difficult to control. Cravings and emotions and those sorts of things tend to present. Um, so that's kind of loosely how sugar impacts those. It's all to do with how it impacts your insulin and your stress hormones, and how that drives up estrogen.
Right.
Um, but also, your thyroid is very involved in regulating your menstrual cycle as well. And again, too much sugar, too much inflammation and stress hormones can impact your thyroid function. So that will have an impact on the menstrual cycle as well.
All right, thank you. Yeah, that was a really good, clear explanation. So, but just to clarify, then, when you say sex hormones, you're talking about the hormones that are involved in reproduction and menstruation,
Yes.
rather than hormones. I'm trying to think when it's not about having sex; it's about your gender and menstruation and things like that, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So your estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, and they
Yes.
regulate your menstrual cycle and fertility. Um, and they have other roles in the body other than just reproductive roles. Once you're past menopause and you're no longer um fertile, or no longer menstruating, these hormones are still important in your body. Estrogen is important for protecting your brain health and for your
Wow.
bone health and all sorts of other things, skin moisture. Once estrogen starts dropping, we're more likely to have drier, more kind of wrinkly skin. So they do lots of things in the body.
Wow, wow, this is I'm really learning something here. So you touched before on artificial sweeteners, bit of a
Mm.
bugbear for me. So we do know that they're controversial and opinions divided about their safety. So I'm really interested what you, as an expert in nutrition, what do you advise your clients when it comes to sweeteners?
Mm. So I always advise to avoid the artificial sweeteners. There's not many things that I tell my clients to cut out completely, because I'm a big believer in being able to have your foods that you really enjoy in moderation. But I think when it comes to artificial sweeteners, they are disruptive to your gut bacteria. And your gut bacteria is just so important for your
Mm.
overall health. It interacts with your brain health, and that can impact your mood and your cravings. um with Artificial sweeteners have also been shown to drive hunger, and the point of them is to
What?
help you to eat less sugar and eat healthier, but they actually increase appetite, drive hunger. They've been linked to hormone disruption, and there is some concerns about them being kind of cancer causing as well. So my opinion is it's just not worth the risk. They're quite easy to avoid, really, so we may as well just choose alternatives. When it comes to natural sweeteners, these are a better option. They're still not perfect, but they're a better option because they don't have this same disruption to gut bacteria and the same concerns about being cancer causing. Um, so things like stevia is a great option. Um, they're a little bit processed, but things like xylitol and erythritol are better than the artificial sweeteners, not quite as good as stevia. And then monk fruit sweetener, not so available over here in the UK,
Mm,
but
mm.
it is becoming more available. That's quite a good one. Um, so the natural sweeteners, as I say, they're better. They're still not ideal, because when we eat something sweet, even if it's not sugar, it still stimulates a response in our body, which can
Yeah.
basically keep us hooked on that sweet feeling and drive cravings. Um, so I feel it's better to try and wean yourself off of sweet things and kind of retrain your taste buds. And that is best done as a gradual thing. You know, some people like to do it cold turkey, which is fine. In terms of what's practical for a lot of people, just gradually switching over to kind of natural sweeteners, and then gradually reducing down how much of those you have to retrain your taste buds is a good process to go through. And then what you'll find is that when you have less sweet stuff, whether it's sugar or artificial sweeteners or natural sweeteners, you'll be able to taste the sweetness in normal unprocessed foods, and even foods like vegetables will start to taste sweeter as well, and they'll taste better overall.
Yes, I was going to mention this. I'm really glad you mentioned about retraining your taste buds, because it's not a conversation that I hear anyone have. And it was really mad. Must have been about 2 or 3 months after I gave up most of the sugar. I have a little bit, a little bit like in a curry sauce or something like this. I might have a bit, but all of the big like desserts and cakes and everything. So, and it must have been 2 to 3 months, I think, after I'd given that. I was out at a meal, and somebody had ice cream next to me, and I just thought, I wonder. So anyway, I asked them, can I have a taste? So I had a taste, and a very strange thing happened. Half of my taste buds went, come to mama, and the other half were like, and it was like, oh, it's too much. And that is the best thing in the world, where however you're feeling, you're just like, no, that's not something I want to run to anymore. And I really wish I could give people a piece of my brain and say, look, it is possible to retrain those taste buds, because that you don't even need motivation or self-discipline, anything, when you've just retrained how things are naturally to you. Yes. Yeah.
Definitely. And it's something that my clients say to me all the time is, they'll have really cut down on sugar, and then something like Christmas will come around and they'll have a quality street or something like that, and they're like, oh, it was disgusting, because it's just so sickly and sweet. It doesn't actually have any flavor to it. It's just sweet. And at the same time, they're finding that foods that they thought they didn't like certain vegetables, are things that they actually really love. And it's, again, because when your taste buds are trained to like really sweet things, vegetables can taste really bitter, and you have to add so much to them to make them palatable. But actually they are very naturally sweet, and they do taste great when you're not assaulting your taste buds with sugars and artificial sweeteners and ingredients.
What a great phrase, assaulting your taste buds. And just something else I've also noticed is that I switched over. For a long time I wouldn't have any kind of chocolate at all, or occasionally I might have chocolate sweetened with maltitol. That was it. And then what I did was I just switched over to 100%. You can, off Amazon, it's Montezuma's, I think, but it's just cocoa solids. And one of my friends, I gave them some, and their face just went like that, because they were addicted to sugar. I said, this does taste like disappointment, doesn't it? But what I found is that, like, I might eat it with something, some fruit, something like that. But I've noticed that I really appreciate the texture, because it's got a really smooth texture, and the taste is bitter. I've got used to that. But for me, food is much more about texture than it used to be now. Is that something that you recognize?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've tried a lot of sugar-free chocolates, and they're not very nice.
No.
They just don't hit the spot, and I'm a big chocolate fan. And I would much rather have a really dark chocolate, like 80, 90, 100%.
Yeah.
And enjoy the tiny, tiny little bit of sugar that's in there, although the 100% doesn't have any sugar in. And yeah, that tastes much better. And like you said, the mouthfeel is a lot better. Whereas a lot of the sugar-free ones that have the artificial or the even natural sweeteners in, they just don't taste right to me.
No. And I think just to touch on something you've mentioned a couple of times, it's the idea of that. Would you agree with me that food isn't bad? It's how we're using it and how often you have it that is the problem.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, with most of the women that I work with tend to operate on like an 80-20 principle. 80% of the time eat nourishing foods that are, you know, you're really focusing on the nutritional value and what that's giving your body, and 20% of the time maybe have the not so nourishing foods. I don't like to call them good or bad, because all food is
Exactly.
doing something for us, even if
Yes,
it's
yeah.
just giving us a little bit of energy. So yeah, thinking about foods as nourishing or not so nourishing, I think can be quite helpful.
Yes, that's exactly it. Because what I found is that when you label food good or bad, what happens is that if people have they're addicted to it, and they have it, and that they tell themselves a story about how awful they are, they're then bad. Food is bad, they're bad, and it's about yes, nourishing, helpful, unhelpful. So I love you. You've got this very enlightened attitude that I've had ever since I managed to get over my sugar addiction, and it's just wonderful. So I think that's it. I just want to finish off and ask, how can my listeners connect with you and find out more about what you do, Louise?
So you can connect with me online. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, and you can search at Louise Digby Nutrition to find me on there. And then my website is louisedigbynutrition.com, and you can find out all about what I do there. I have a regular masterclass that I run all about metabolism, and I walk you through the steps that I take my clients through. So that's a good one to join me on if you want to kind of dip your toe into my world. Oh, and I should also say that I also have a podcast called The Thriving Metabolism, where we talk about, you know, all the stuff that we've been talking about today, really, and more. And Harriet's going to be joining me on there soon, so I'm looking forward to that.
Me too. Lovely. Well, thank you. It's been, I've learned a lot today. If you just had one piece of advice that you were going to give to my listeners, what is it?
Ooh, what to pick from? I think the piece of advice that I find myself giving most often is to make sure you are eating some protein, and that you are including it particularly in your breakfast. It makes such a big difference to how you feel. And also, you know, on the subject of sugar and cravings, if you can get a good dose of protein into your breakfast, it makes it so much easier to manage cravings and reduce cravings as well, because it gets your blood sugar steady from your first meal of the day. So that's my advice.
Yes, no, I amen to that, as the Americans would say. And also, there's something about that, about starting the day strong, starting the day well, because as you know, we are faced with junk food at every turn when you go out into the world. And if you've had that strong start and you're like, oh, you know, actually, I don't feel hungry, I haven't got any cravings, that has a domino effect through the day. Okay, then. Well, thanks very much for joining us, Louise. I will put all the links you mentioned in the show notes. So if anybody didn't quite catch them, just go to the show notes for those. So I'll say goodbye to you, and bye to the listeners or the viewers. I lost that one. All right. Bye-bye for now, Louise.
Bye bye. Thanks for having me.